Begin with a story that we have been following very, very closely on this program, one with significant consequences for our democracy and for the rule of law in America, and one that will go a long way toward answering questions about whether every criminal defendant in America is treated the same way. Earlier today, federal judge Tanya Chutkan imposed a partial gag order on the ex-president in the federal election interference case. Donald Trump has been restricted from making statements about potential witnesses and their testimony in the case, prosecutors and court staff. The New York Times reports this about the judge's comments in a hearing this morning, quote, Trump's freedom of speech rights do not permit him to launch a pretrial smear campaign against those people, said the judge Tanya Chutkan. Quote, no other defendant would be allowed to do so, and I'm not going to allow it in this case. Donald Trump is still allowed to attack the Biden administration and the Justice Department, and he is still allowed to make comments about Washington, D.C. and its residents, who, of course, make up the jury pool for the trial. The Times describes the order this way as, quote, nuanced and limited, adding this, quote, Judge Chutkan appeared to be trying to thread the needle on balancing Trump's rights to political speech as a candidate for the country's highest office and her duties to protect the integrity of the proceedings in front of her. The judge appeared not to buy Team Trump's argument that a gag order would be a violation of the ex-president's right to free speech. NBC News reports this, quote, Chutkan laughed after Trump's lawyer, John Lauro, argued that the current conditions are working, saying she disagreed before she went through some of Trump's statements one by one. Chutkan said Trump doesn't have unfettered First Amendment rights and that there is no question that the court is entitled to draw restrictions to ensure the fair administration of justice. The big question now becomes this: how will the gag order be enforced? On that, the New York Times reports this, quote, the judge did not immediately address how she will enforce her gag order. She merely said she would assess any consequences for Trump if and when he violates it. The ex-president of the United States under a limited gag order in the federal case about his campaign to overturn democracy and the results of the 2020 election is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney Glenn Kirshner is here. He was in the courtroom today for this. Also joining us, NYU law professor and former clerk to Judge Sonia Sotomayor, Melissa Murray is here. And former top official at the Department of Justice, our friend Andrew Weissmann is back. Glenn Kirshner, you were there. Take us inside.
Yeah, it was fairly intense, Nicole. It was a pretty heated discussion, particularly by John Lauro, Donald Trump's criminal defense attorney, who took the lead arguing for Donald Trump. And at times it got pretty animated when, for example, John Lauro kept saying the quiet part out loud. He said a couple of times, the way to avoid all of these problems, Judge, and in fact, the only solution is to push this trial until after the November 2024 presidential election. And I think that is when Judge Chutkan herself got most animated. And she said, and I quote, this trial will not yield to an election cycle and we will not revisit the trial date. So she gave him a full hearing, let him say anything he wanted. Often she observed that you seem to be speaking to an audience other than the court. Signal was pretty clear that Lauro was saying, at least at times, what his client wanted him to say. He honestly did sound like an assistant campaign chairman or a PR flack much of the time. But, you know, it seems that Judge Chutkan was determined not to let Donald Trump continue to endanger witnesses, the court staff, or the prosecutors or their attorneys and their staff. So she imposed the somewhat limited gag order that she did.
Andrew Weissmann, you know as well as anyone how we struggle mightily with reporting on Trump's statements without amplifying them. I think in this instance, it's important to understand what he's telegraphing to his supporters and what he said, I think, hours before the gag order was imposed. I'm going to paraphrase from it because he uses nonsensical things in between, but you'll get the spirit of it. This is from this morning. Tomorrow's a big day for democracy. A leaking, crooked, and deranged prosecutor, Jack Smith, who has a terrible record of failure, is asking a highly partisan Obama-appointed judge, Tanya Chutkan, who should recuse herself based on the horrible things she has said, to silence me through the use of a powerful gag order, making it impossible for me to criticize those who are doing the silencing, namely crooked Joe Biden and his corrupt and weaponized DOJ and FBI. He goes on and on. I'll stop there. The point is, you see how critical smearing and annihilating the credibility of the DOJ, the FBI, Judge Chutkan, and everyone involved is to his political strategy. It seems that instead of being intimidated by that, Judge Chutkan sort of nodded to that and said, I will not be bullied into doing something that endangers the rule of law. Is that the right read?
I think it is, but I would give sort of two notes or sort of footnotes to that, Nicole. One is, I thought it was striking that the government up front conceded that there was absolutely nothing they were asking for that would restrict Donald Trump from criticizing the current sitting president, saying that is not, he is not a party to this. You can say any and all things to try and draw the sting out of that particular argument that Donald Trump is making, that somehow this is Joe Biden saying he doesn't want to be criticized. That was something that the government up front said, that is not what they're seeking. He can continue to say anything he wants. And in fact, the judge then said that she is not going to bar that. And the second thing is, if you remember that the government's motion here was tailored to trying to protect the jury pool. It was about protecting the information flow to the jury. That's not really how the judge ended up ruling. The judge ended up saying, I understand that, but I can deal with that issue when we pick a jury. What I'm concerned about is violence. And so the line that she drew was, you can attack institutions. You can attack DOJ. You can attack the institution of the executive branch, the White House, Joe Biden himself, but you cannot attack prosecutors and their families, judges and their families, the judges' staff, jurors, and witnesses. So she was very, very concerned about something that I think she's looking at what happened in New York. She said she was looking at that, and she was concerned about the trying to forestall the problem of violence being taken and in response to the former president's words. And so that's why you see this differentiation in her ruling as to what's allowed and what's not allowed.
You know, Melissa, we should also keep in mind that one woman has been arrested already for threatening the life of Judge Tanya Chutkan. This is from the New York Times profile about her this weekend. Quote, so far she has treated Trump like any other defendant and has indicated to colleagues that she will approach the trial as she would any criminal proceeding. Even in the midst of a history-making case against a former president, she continues to take on more routine cases and has not requested a reduction in her docket. But there are differences. Because of threats to her life from Trump supporters, Judge Chutkan no longer rides the 5 miles by bicycle from her house to the federal courthouse in Washington. Instead, she jogs with U.S. Marshals on different routes, and then they drive her to work. For someone who is not very sentimental, my sister is surprisingly patriotic. That's Robin Chutkan who says that. Quote, we come from a country that has a more precarious relationship with democracy than America. It gives her a reverence for democratic institutions, whether it's the orderly transfer of power or everyone being deserving of a fair defense. When the curtain is pulled back on all the people who have touched any effort to uphold our institutions, I'm thinking of Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman, or to uphold the rule of law, I'm thinking of Judge Chutkan, I'm thinking of Fani Willis, I'm thinking of the DA in New York. Everyone's life changes. Right. And this may seem minor, and of course it is. It's her daily workout changed. But no one can be part of the effort to hold Donald Trump accountable under the rule of law the way any one of the four of us would be without risking threat to their life.
No, that's exactly right, Nicole. And the threat to Judge Chutkan was not a minor one. I mean, this was someone threatened to kill her if Donald Trump was not elected in 2024. And we know from just recent history that these threats on the lives of members of the federal judiciary can sometimes come to really serious consequences. Judge Esther Salas in New Jersey saw her son killed and her husband injured because someone was taking aim at her. And the same person had a dossier with Justice Sotomayor's profile in it as well. So these threats are, again, taken seriously because they can be consequential. I will also note that of the individuals that you named, Fani Willis, Judge Chutkan, Ruby Moss and Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, those are all Black women. And again, not to say that there's anything particular about that, but it does seem that they can be a lightning rod for some of the ire that Donald Trump's diehard supporters like to direct at those who they believe are targeting him unfairly. So she really took a very hard line in this gag order to try and sort of balance the equities on both sides, the fact that there are First Amendment concerns, that this is someone who is in a presidential campaign, but that public safety and the rule of law and this process are also at stake.